On December 14, 2025, a joyful Hanukkah by the Sea celebration at Sydney's Bondi beach turned into one of the darkest nights in Australian history. What began as a family-friendly public event ended in terror when a father and son opened fire from a nearby footbridge, unleashing more than 100 bullets into the crowd below. 16 people were killed, ranging in age from just 10 to 87, making it the deadliest terror attack Australia has ever faced and the second deadliest mass shooting since Port Arthur. Among the victims was Rabbi Eli Schlanger, a key organizer of the event. This attack didn't just shatter lives, it exposed deadly gaps in intelligence, gun laws, and Australia's response to rising antisemitism. A night of celebration turned to horror to understand why this attack shook Sydney so deeply. You first have to understand what Hanukkah by the Sea means to the Jewish community. For decades, Chabad Bondi has hosted this annual event at Bondi Beach in nearby Archer Park. It's not just a religious gathering, it's a tradition woven into the city itself. Families come together for the giant menorah lighting. Kids enjoy face painting and activities, music fills the air, and people share traditional Hanukkah food. It's a public, joyful celebration of Jewish life, resilience, belonging open to everyone in Sydney. Bondi is more than just a beach. For many Jewish families, especially in surrounding suburbs like Waverley, it's home. Synagogues, schools, community centers, and generations of families are rooted here. With one of the largest Jewish populations in Australia, Bondi Beach has long been a place where people could openly and proudly celebrate their identity. That openness, being visible, being public is exactly what was targeted. On December 14, 2025, a father and son stepped onto a footbridge overlooking Archer Park, carrying long-barreled rifles. The older man was 50-year-old Sajed Akram. With him was his 24-year-old son, Naveed Akram. In a matter of minutes, they fired around 103 bullets into the crowd below. The victims came from every generation. The youngest was 10-year-old Matilda. The oldest was 87. Families were torn apart in seconds. Among those killed was Rabbi Eli Schlanger, assistant rabbi at Shabbat of Bondi, and one of the key organizers of the very event under attack. His wife lost not only her husband, but also her best friend's spouse in the same shooting. Their baby was only a few months old. 10-year-old Matilda was also among the dead. A former student at Harmony School of Inquiry, she was remembered as a bright, joyful child who brought happiness wherever she went. Her aunt later shared the family's heartbreak online, saying she kept refreshing her phone, hoping the news wasn't real, that somehow it would turn out to be a terrible mistake. 16 people were killed. The scale of the loss made this the second deadliest mass shooting in Australian history, surpassed only by Port Arthur. In 1996, it also stands as the deadliest terror attack the country has ever experienced. The unexpected hero, yet even in that darkness, an extraordinary act of courage emerged. As shots rang out and panic spread, one man chose to run toward danger. Ahmed Al-Ahmed, a 43-year-old fruit shop owner from Sydney's Sutherland Shire, was at Bondi Beach that night. He wasn't trained in combat. He wasn't security. He was just a regular person who made a split-second decision to act. As one gunman stood on the footbridge firing into the crowd, Ahmed noticed him adjusting his position. What happened next was captured on video and quickly spread around the world. Wearing a white t-shirt, Ahmed moved out from between two parked cars, came up behind the shooter, and tackled him. The fight was brutal. Ahmed managed to wrestle the rifle away, took control of the weapon, and even turned it back toward the attacker, forcing him to retreat toward the bridge where his father was still firing. Once the shooter fled and knowing police were on their way, Ahmed placed the rifle against a tree and raised his hands, making it clear he was not a threat. That bravery came at a heavy price. During the struggle, and with the second gunman still shooting, Ahmed was hit twice, once in the arm and once in the hand. He was rushed to hospital and taken straight into emergency surgery. Outside the hospital, his cousin spoke briefly to the media, summing it up in simple words: "He's a hero, 100%. Police and leaders didn't hesitate to agree. NSW Police Commissioner Mal Lanyon called Ahmed a genuine hero, saying plainly that many people were alive that night because of what he did. Prime Minister Anthony Albanese also praised his actions, saying Australians had run toward danger to protect others and that those people saved lives. The story reached far beyond Australia. During a government meeting, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu singled Ahmed out, calling him a courageous Muslim man who stopped a terrorist from killing innocent Jews, in a moment defined by hate. Ahmed's actions cut through it, all showing what basic humanity and moral courage really look like. Ahmed has since undergone his first surgery and faces a long road to recovery. A fundraising campaign set up to support him raised more than $665,000 Australian dollars, a powerful reflection of how deeply his actions moved people across the country and around the world. The Gunman, a trail of extremism and missed warnings. Investigators moved in, and the immediate chaos faded. A far more unsettling story began to take shape, one that raised serious questions about who these men were and how an attack like this could happen in a country known for some of the toughest gun laws in the world. The older gunman, 50-year-old Sajid Akram, first came to Australia in 1998 on a student visa. Over time, he became a permanent resident. He was also a licensed gun owner. His son, Naveed Akram, was 24, born in Australia, and an Australian citizen. What's most alarming is this. Sajid legally owned 6 registered firearms and had held a valid firearms license since 2015. But Naveed wasn't unknown to authorities back in 2019. Australia's Domestic Intelligence Agency, ASIO, investigated Naveed over potential links to a Sydney-based Islamic State cell. That investigation ran for 6 months. At the time, officials concluded he was not an immediate threat. According to Prime Minister Anthony Albanese, no clear evidence of radicalization was found then. What authorities are now trying to understand is what changed after that. Between 2019 and December 2025, something clearly shifted. When and how Naveed became radicalized is now at the center of an ongoing investigation, and the details emerging are deeply troubling. Multiple reports indicate Naveed had connections to Wissam Haddad, a controversial preacher whose influence has been linked to several generations of Australian jihadists. Naveed is believed to have attended the Al Madina Dawah Center in Bankstown, where Haddad was a prominent spiritual figure. He also reportedly acted as a street preacher for Haddad's organization. Those links didn't end there. Investigators say Naveed also had associations with Isaac el-Matari, who was later sentenced to 7 years in prison. After declaring himself the Australian commander of Islamic State and plotting terror attacks, another connection was Youssef Uwaina, a known as youth recruiter who served nearly 4 years behind bars for encouraging Australian minors to carry out attacks. After his release, Uwaina was photographed in August 2025 on the Sydney Harbour Bridge, waving a black flag linked to jihadist groups during an anti-Gaza war protest. In the weeks leading up to the attack, the situation grew even more concerning. According to investigative reports, Sajid and Naveed traveled to the Philippines shortly before. December 14, 2025, the region is a known stronghold for Islamic State-aligned groups in East Asia. Police sources believe the trip was for what they described as military-style training, and became one of the most damning discoveries at the scene of the attack. Police found 2 Islamic State flags inside the Akram family vehicle. Prime Minister Albanese later said the attack would appear that this was motivated by Islamic State ideology, while stressing there was no evidence the pair were acting as part of a larger terror cell. Security experts have since been blunt about what this all points to. John Coyne, a former Australian Federal Police Intelligence Coordinator and now Director of National Security Programs at the Australian Strategic Policy Institute, didn't mince words. He called it plainly that is a failure of the system. The firearms licenses were never revoked. The weapons were never seized. The son's extremist links flagged years earlier somehow slipped through the cracks, and a father legally licensed continued to own 6 guns while his son moved deeper into extremist networks, traveled overseas for training, and pledged loyalty to Islamic State without anyone stepping in before it was too late. Rising antisemitism. The broader context, the Bondi beach shooting didn't happen in isolation. It unfolded during a period when antisemitism in Australia had already been rising at an alarming rate, something the Jewish community had been warning about for years. In the 12 months leading up to the attack, from October 1, 2024 to September 30, 2025, the Executive Council of Australian Jewry recorded 1,654 anti-Semitic incidents nationwide. That number was slightly lower than the previous year's record high, 2,062 cases. But the reality was still confronting. Broken down, it meant Jewish Australians were facing, on average, about 4 to 5 anti-Semitic incidents every single day. These weren't just numbers on a page. They included homes, cars, and schools being vandalized with anti-Israel slogans. There was an arson attack on a synagogue. Jewish childcare centers were threatened and targeted. In one particularly disturbing case, 2 nurses were suspended after posting online comments about harming or refusing medical treatment to Jewish patients. Much of this surge followed the October 7, 2023, Hamas attacks on Israel and the war that followed. A parliamentary inquiry into anti-Semitism completed in 2024 found that Jewish Australians were experiencing what it described as an unprecedented rise in anti-Semitism across the nation. In the aftermath of the Bondi attack, The Executive Council of Australian Jury released a statement that reflected deep frustration with the political response. They said, "The time for dialogue has passed. We require assertive leadership and immediate action to eliminate anti-Semitism from Australia's public sphere. The government's foremost responsibility is to ensure the safety of its citizens." Rabbi Abraham Cooper from the Simon Wiesenthal Center in Los Angeles was equally direct. "This is not the first incident of this nature in Australia, but it is the most severe," he said. "Merely expressing supportive sentiments is insufficient. We are seeking tangible actions and policy reforms." Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu accused Prime Minister Anthony Albanese of failing to rein in anti-Semitism, arguing that the recognition of Palestine contributed to rising Jew hatred. Whether or not that political argument holds, one fact is clear: anti-Semitic threats, attacks, and hate speech had been increasing across Australia for more than a year before Bondi. The Jewish community had repeatedly warned that their concerns were not being taken seriously. Australia's gun laws, strict, but with cracks. One of the most confronting questions after the Bondi beach shooting is this: how did something like this happen in Australia, a country known worldwide for having some of the toughest gun laws? The answer, it turns out, lies in the gaps. After the 1996 Port Arthur massacre in Tasmania, where 35 people were killed by a lone gunman, Australia completely overhauled its firearms system. The National Firearms Agreement was introduced, replacing a patchwork of state laws with a single national framework. Semi-automatic and pump-action guns were heavily restricted. A massive gun buyback followed, with more than 650,000 firearms surrendered. Strict licensing rules were put in place, and Australia became a global example of what gun reform could achieve. And for years, it worked. In the 2 decades after Port Arthur, Australia did not experience a mass shooting. Former US President Barack Obama and gun control advocates around the world regularly pointed to Australia as proof that decisive gun reform saves lives, but Bondi exposed where the system didn't. Sajid Akram had legally held a firearms license since 2015. Under existing laws, there was no automatic process to review or flag his license just because his son, who lived separately and did not share his name, had been investigated by intelligence agencies back in 2019. Those systems simply weren't linked. Intelligence concerns did not trigger firearm license checks. Prime Minister Anthony Albanese acknowledged that flaw almost immediately. Speaking the day after the attack, he said, "People's situations can change. Individuals can become radicalized over time. Licenses should not be indefinite." Within just 48 hours of the Bondi shooting, authorities announced a package of proposed gun law reforms moving at a speed rarely seen, but one that reflected Australia's long-standing bipartisan approach to gun control. The changes being proposed are significant. First, firearm licenses would be subject to regular reviews instead of being open-ended. That means if someone is flagged for extremist links, radicalization, or major changes in their personal circumstances, their license could be reassessed and revoked. Second, the number of firearms an individual can own would be capped. Right now, there is no limit, which is how Sajid Akram was able to legally possess 6 registered guns. Third, certain higher-risk weapons and modifications would be further restricted. Western Australia Premier Roger Cook was blunt about it, saying, "Frankly, I see no justification for these high-powered automatic weapons and high calibre firearms to exist in Australia." Another major step would be fast-tracking a national firearms register. This centralized system would allow federal and state authorities to instantly see who owns what, closing the jurisdictional blind spots that currently exist. The reforms would also require Australian citizenship to hold a gun license. Sajid Akram first arrived on a student visa, and under the proposed changes, non-citizens would no longer be eligible to own firearms. Additional customs controls are also planned, aimed at stopping the import of weapon accessories and equipment that could be used to modify. Firearms police commissioners would be given broader powers to decide whether someone is a fit and proper person to own a gun, taking into account not just criminal history, but behavior, views, associations. These aren't small adjustments. They amount to a major tightening of an already strict system. Opposition parties have indicated support, clearing the way for swift legislation, with even the Greens backing key measures. But not everyone believes gun laws alone address the core issue. Shadow Home Affairs Minister Jan O'Dunia made that point clearly, saying, "Revising gun laws will not eliminate anti-Semitism, which was the underlying cause of these attacks." In his view, gun reform treats the tool but not the ideology that drove the violence. The fragility of celebration, the resilience of community. When you watch the footage from Bondi Beach, What hits hardest is how ordinary everything looked just moments before the shots rang out. Kids running around, families eating together, music, laughter, a community gathered to celebrate a tradition built around light overcoming darkness. That's exactly what terrorism tries to shatter. Not just lives, but the feeling of safety, the ability to gather freely, the right to celebrate who you are in public. Prime Minister Anthony Albanese put that into clear words. He called the shooting a targeted attack on Jewish Australians and a terrorist incident, adding, "An attack on Jewish Australians is an attack on every Australian. There is no place for this hate, violence, and terrorism in our nation. Let me be clear, we will eradicate it." In the days since, the response from the community has been powerful. Vigils were held within hours. Australians from all walks of life stood alongside the Jewish community, and the courage of Ahmad al-Amada, a Muslim man who stepped in to save not Jewish lives, has become a symbol far bigger than this one night. His actions remind people that even in moments of terror, some choose bravery over fear, compassion over hatred, and action over standing by. The grief is raw. Rabbi Mendel Castell, the brother-in-law of Rabbi Eli Schlanger, spoke openly about the devastation facing the family. "They have fallen apart," he said. "They were inseparable friends since school, both lost husbands here. The rabbi's baby is just a few months old. It's incredibly difficult. It's too early to assess how they will cope. They are in shock." For locals, the aftermath felt unreal. Morgan Gabriel, 27, who lives near Bondi Beach, said she was walking to a nearby cinema. "What went wrong? What's being done?" Investigation into the Bondi Beach shooting is far from over. It could take months, even years. But some early conclusions are already taking shape. First, there were intelligence gaps. ASIO's investigation into Naveed Akram in 2019 was closed, with no system in place to reassess the risk if he became more radicalized later. Intelligence agencies and firearms licensing bodies weren't connected in a way that would automatically flag concerns, especially when a licensed gun owner's family member was under scrutiny. Second, the pathway to radicalization raises serious questions. The network Naveed was linked to, centered around preacher Wissam Haddad, had already produced multiple convicted terrorists. Yet Haddad himself has never been charged with a terrorism offense. A former ACO undercover operative repeatedly warned that young people were being indoctrinated, but it remains unclear whether those warnings led to stronger monitoring. Third, international travel appears to have been missed. Sajid and Naveed Akram's trip to the Philippines, a known terrorism hotspot, reportedly for military-style training, did not trigger urgent reviews or changes to their firearms licensing status. Many experts believe it should have. Then there's what some leaders call cultural blindness. The rise in anti-Semitic hate had been documented again and again. The Jewish community raised concerns repeatedly. But according to community representatives, political responses focused more on words than on decisive action. Now, changes are underway. The government is moving ahead with the gun law reforms already outlined, a national hate crimes and incidents database is also being established to improve how extremist violence is tracked and addressed. At the same time, there's growing debate over whether Australia's terrorism laws and surveillance powers are strong enough to prevent something like this from happening again. What happened at Bondi has left a scar, but it has also forced a reckoning about safety, accountability, and what it really means to protect a diverse, open society. The victims remembered in time, the names of the attackers will fade. The names of the victims should not. Rabbi Eli Schlanger is remembered as a man who devoted his life to serving the Jewish community, bringing people together, building connections, and helping others feel they belonged. 10-year-old Matilda is remembered through the words of her aunt, who described her as joyful and spirited, a bright light in her family and in her community. Reuven Morrison is remembered, along with many others whose stories may not all be known publicly, but whose losses are deeply felt by the people who love them. There were dozens more among them, an 87-year-old Holocaust survivor and younger community members who were only just beginning their lives. Each death represents more than a life lost. It's a family shattered, a community in mourning, and a future changed forever. Conclusion: a nation reflecting what happened at Bondi Beach was not the result of a single failure. It was the collision of many intelligence gaps, unchecked radicalization, warnings from communities that went unheard, gun laws with hidden loopholes, and a wider rise in religious hatred in modern society. But this story is not only about failure, it's also about the courage of one ordinary man, Ahmad al-Ahmad. It's about a Jewish community that has faced hatred for centuries and continues to stand strong. And it's about a country now forced to look hard at its systems and decide how to do better. As Australia moves forward, difficult questions remain. Will intelligence agencies connect the dots sooner next time? Will political leaders move beyond words and take real action against rising anti-Semitism? Will the proposed gun law reforms truly close the gaps that allowed this tragedy to happen? Australia has confronted terrorism before. It has endured mass shootings before. But this attack embodied an open, public, joyful celebration of Jewish life. Carried out by two men driven by Islamic State ideology, has struck at something deeper. It's a reminder that building a safe, inclusive, and diverse society is ongoing work. It demands vigilance, honest reflection, and the courage to act when others choose hate. Ahmed Al-Ahmed showed that courage on December 14, 2025. Now, the question is whether Australia's institutions will do the same.